We're going to be talking about picking in pubs. So one thing that a lot of people don't realize, well, a lot of people don't talk about it. A lot of people realize it, but a lot of people don't talk about it, especially on YouTube, especially on Twitch. Pro players are super guilty of this. Everybody cares about competitive in Dota 2, but pubs and competitive are completely different. Competitive players, they pick certain heroes that work in competitive that don't necessarily work in pubs. But because everybody in Dota is super obsessed with Dota as an esport, they still use competitive as a reference for picking in pubs. People look at Dota2ProTracker.com, people look at DotaBuff, people look at all of these different things for learning what heroes they should be picking, but that's not their bracket. That's not the battlefield that they're playing in. That's not the battlefield that I'm playing in. Even if you are a 7 to 8K MMR player who's pro level, you're still playing in pubs. You're still playing in a battlefield where people are largely uncoordinated. And that is something that I think has to be factored in when it comes to your picks. So how do you pick in pubs? Here is a big difference between competitive and pubs. In competitive, if you pick to do your role's job, if you are playing with PPD, if you're playing with Nico Baby, if you are a mid laner in competitive and you do your job, your team will carry you. You will win. In pubs, I don't think I even need to tell you, your team is not going to carry you. Chances are your teammates are probably idiots. They're probably very greedy. They're probably running around like chickens with their heads cut off. And this is something that you have to use and abuse to actually get ahead. So when it comes to picks, you need to pick differently. Instead of picking to just do your role's job, you have to do that as well as pick to scale and pick to have control in the game. All right, so let's talk about control. How can you pick to control the game? I want to give you a couple of examples because I don't want this to sound super meta. I know it's really easy to hypothesize about these things in Dota. In fact, as a content creator, and honestly, a lot of pro players and just the general public of Dota is guilty of this, of basically just like hypothesizing all of these crazy scenarios and then not actually looking at how to practically put it into the game. So if I was personally boosting an account, like literally my life depended on it, and I had to pay I had to get a paycheck in order to pay my rent, in order to pay university, in order to literally put food on the table, to get an account from 3K bracket to 5K bracket, I would never, ever, if my life was on the line, pick something that doesn't control the game. Even if I go to PPD's DotaBuff and I see that he's picking Bane in every single game, or maybe a better example is something like Oracle, okay? That hero is currently good and strong and competitive. In fact, in most metas, Oracle is really strong and competitive because it's a literal steroid for your team. You just buff your team. But you have to consider that even if this hero is strong, he doesn't push towers, he doesn't clear waves, he doesn't win team fights, he saves people. So if you save somebody and they win the team fight, well, that looks great. That looks fantastic. You win the game. But that person you saved is not you. You're gonna queue in the next game, you're gonna get a different teammate that you're going to save, and they might not be able to carry the game. And so that's the thing, is like the reason that you want to pick to control is so that you can consistently make up for what your team is lacking in pubs, which will be completely different depending on the game. And it is all about consistency across 100 games rather than like what is the perfect hero within this one game. So to give you an example, it's not Oracle, because this hero doesn't have a lot of control of the game because he doesn't do a lot. He does one thing extremely well: Shadow Shaman. This is one of my absolute favorite heroes to pick as a position 5. Like I said, if I was boosting from 3K to 5K, I wouldn't pick Oracle, I would pick Shadow Shaman. And the reason for this is because he can push, he can win fights, he has tons of stuns, he can carry the game if you get a lot of farm, you can split push, you hit towers, you can take Roshan with Serpent Wards, you can farm incredibly quickly with the Aghanim Shard. I could go on and on. The list goes on. This hero does a lot, and that's what matters. Because here's the bottom line. If your teammates are good and you can trust them to carry you, you can win with Oracle. But you can also win with Shadow Shaman. It's the same. Shadow Shaman does the normal job of a support, which is win the lane, stun people for the team, protect your team, that sort of thing. Shadow Shaman does the exact same thing that Oracle does in terms of supporting the team, but if your teammates are incompetent, or they pick because they're trying to have fun and they pick Pudge mid so you don't have a hero that does any tower damage, well, you can do that on Shadow Shaman, and you can actually build the hero to do tower damage to do that even better. So essentially, the reason you want to pick heroes that can quote-unquote control the game, heroes that can do a lot of jobs in the game, is because you can make up for the inevitable lack of something that will exist on your team. And that's really the bottom line for me, is that it doesn't matter how good you are. If you pick Oracle and you don't have heroes or teammates that are worth saving, it doesn't matter if you're PPD. It doesn't matter if you're Nico Baby. You're not going to carry this game. It's not going to be possible by the sheer nature that your hero just does one thing really well. So the second thing that you want to do in order to pick better heroes in pubs is pick heroes that can actually scale. And the reason for this is that in literally every single bracket in Dota, including in the pro level bracket, the bracket that I play in, the bracket that PPD plays in, if you are playing in a pub environment with 5 people that don't know each other, 5 people that aren't sitting in Discord with each other, hell, 5 people that probably dislike each other, because let's be real, this is Dota, there will be an excess amount of space on the map. Why? Because everybody is incredibly uncoordinated. Because of this festering hatred, because of even, jokes aside, because of this just lack of coordination, people are not going to be quick at ganking you. People are not going to be good at maximizing their efficiency on the map. And so you can basically almost always get more farm in pubs than in competitive. That means that heroes that are good and competitive are not necessarily good in pubs, because maybe these heroes in competitive are specifically good because they are great with no farm. So in competitive, if you are a 5 position, typically you'll be buying a bunch of sentry wards, you'll be buying smokes all the time, your cores will be extremely good because they'll be tier 1 players. If you watch these, DPC and stuff, you'll see these players that are playing with people who know how to completely maximize the map, maximize their farming patterns so that they're getting every single neutral camp on the spawn, every single bounty rune, things like that. Basically, people are going to be so good at consuming the map that there is no space. So heroes that are good with no farm will naturally thrive in competitive. But in pubs, because of this uncoordinated nature that we talked about, games always have an excess of farm. And so you want to pick a hero that can actually abuse that and do something with that. Also, it's worth noting that this exact same uncoordinated nature of pubs that we're talking about causes games to always go late. This is something I don't even have to tell you. As a Dota player, chances are you already know this. I'm telling you, I'm preaching to the choir here. You know exactly what I'm saying. You play your game, you try to go high ground, your team throws, goes back the other way, enemy team throws, all of a sudden you're in a 60-minute game with these crazy neutral items and everything is chaos. Every single Dota game in pubs feels like it goes to the late game. In competitive, it's not about that at all. Teams are incredibly good at playing around timings where, the carry will be like, okay, I got my BKB, let's go, let's end the game right now. And then they do it. That's never going to happen in a pub. So pubs always go late. And so if you're picking heroes that are quote unquote good in competitive, but they can't farm, then you will consistently go to the late game and you'll be consistently useless in the late game. And these are heroes that if you were to pick them in competitive, they would be considered bad. But in pubs, they would be considered good. And so that is super worth thinking about. If you are about to pick a hero in a pub, think, what does this hero actually do with items? Because you will get items, because there's an excess of farm on the map, and you will go to the late game. So it will matter. The last part of picking in pubs is probably the most obvious one, but it's still something that's definitely worth thinking about. A lot of people get carried away with scaling and controlling the game, and that's good. I would rather people get carried away with scaling and controlling the game and maybe be a little bit extreme in it and then dial it back a little bit and start doing the regular stuff of their role, because That way, at least you're abusing the fact that pubs work in the way that they do. It's a start, it's a foundation to build on, but you have to remember while doing all of this stuff that controlling and scaling are important, but there is a reason why each role has a designation for the jobs that that role does. To give you a quick example, the offlane farms aura items because auras buffing up 2 cores causes you to literally mathematically have higher damage in the late game and damage reductions in the late game than the offlaner building like another carry. That is just the nature of Dota with how it is programmed. It's been like that forever, and it seems like it's going to be like that for as long as the game exists. Somebody's got to build the aura items, and it turns out that the offlane role is the best for that. So, this is a fundamentally good thing in Dota in general. You need to do the fundamentals of your role, and I think everybody generally knows what those are. We'll talk a little bit about those later, but I think people generally know what the fundamentals of the role are: 5-position wards, offlane builds aura items, and so forth. But you need to make sure while doing that, you're picking heroes that also scale and control. Once again, going back to the example of Shadow Shaman, this hero is a great position 5. A lot of people say, oh, I can't win games with position 5, Jenkins, it's so hard. Bullshit. That's bullshit. If you think that, you're just not picking heroes that scale and control. Straight up, that is one of the biggest issues with 5 positions, and it's literally causing me to bald. This is causing me so much stress because there are exceptionally good players that are... It's so sad to see the MMR that is lost simply because they are picking heroes, they're playing extremely well, but they're picking heroes that don't scale and control the game because they think that because they're a 5 position, they have to sacrifice. You have to sacrifice your entire game. That is not how pubs work. That's a competitive mentality. Don't get stuck in that mentality. But in any case, Shadow Shaman is a great example of a position 5 that does everything. Because, like I said, you can stun for your team, you can run in and die for your team, you can support them in lane because you do huge right-click damage and because you have stuns and nukes. So you do all of the stuff that a position 5 wants to do. You do great with no items. So if your team is farming the entire map because you just got Arteezy on your team, you got Nico Baby on your team, then that's fine. Let them do that. Shadow Shaman does great with no items. But you get an Aghanim Scepter, all of a sudden you're completely ravaging team fights. All of a sudden you can split push with Boots of Travel. The enemy team has to be worried about you literally throning them solo if the enemy team lets you get farm, if your team doesn't take farm from you. But also, it's not that you can just split push. That's not the only thing that this hero does. This hero also wins fights because you have stuns. You can Roshan because he does a lot of physical damage. You can sit in side lanes and split push like I mentioned. You can play with your team and set up for them because your hero has a bunch of stuns and they hold somebody in one specific location, so you can gank with some other hero like Alina, for example. There's a lot that you can do with this hero. You can defend because you have an AoE nuke. There's a ton of stuff you can do with Shadow Shaman, but he also does the job of the role, and that is incredibly important. Now, I want to talk about what actually are the jobs of each role, just so it's easy to go into a game and make sure that the heroes that we're picking actually do the job, as well as scale and control. And I'll give you a couple of examples of heroes that do all of these things that we want when it comes to picking in pubs. So, for the 5 position, usually this role, at least as Dota currently is, and as it's been for a long time, the 5 position wants to ward. You want to win the late game, you want to win the lane for your carry. That's very important. You want to tank ganks, aka you're the first person to run in and die, which is unfortunate, but that's life. You want to be active from the moment the game starts until the moment the game finishes, and typically you want to have some sort of disable. That's usually what a 5 position does. And like I mentioned, Shadow Shaman's a good example of this. A hero like Jakiro is another great example of this because Jakiro, just like Shadow Shaman, has some tower push, you have some stuns, you're good at winning the lane, you do all of the things, so that's good. 4 position, you want to roam and gank a lot, that's generally the job of the 4. You want to win team fights, you want to scale. The 4 position is more of the scaling 5 position, and the good thing is, you know, this is what every role should be doing in pubs, so that's already covered. And then usually you want to offer some sort of disable or team fight from the 4 position. So honestly, a lot of 4s do this. Something like Earthshaker would be really good at this because you can single-handedly win team fights and win the game with your blink into Echo Slam. You have great stun lock, so you can gank. You can split push as well because you have AoE wave clear. The only thing Earthshaker doesn't do quite well is push towers, which is something that's really nice to have that control in a game. But the great thing about 4th position is you get net worth. And so 4th position, you can build something like a meteor hammer to push towers. And so that's also a consideration, is if you are picking heroes to do these things, make sure that you're actually itemizing and building to do these things as well. So if you're picking a hero that lacks something and you want more control of the game, just build an item that does it. That's fine as well. Remember, this is pubs. You can get away with it. Don't think you can't get away with it because you see pros online say that you can't, because they're talking about competitive. We're talking about pubs. Okay, 3 position, you want to pressure the carry, of course. You want to build auras and be tanky. That's extremely important. And then you want to initiate in the mid to the late game. So some heroes that are really good at doing this, Axe is a currently really great example of a hero that does everything that you want for picking in pubs. Obviously, he's a great laner that pressures the carry because you run in, you've got lots of nuke damage, they try to hit you, you just spin the wave down, that's incredibly annoying. He's one of the strongest heroes currently in the offlane, incredibly tanky. He has a BKB piercing disable, so good. You do all of the things that regular offlaners do. You can build auras if you want because he's just a tanky guy that wants to run around and kill people. 2 position, you obviously in this role, I shouldn't say obviously, but 2 position, you want to get net worth and you want to kill people. You want to be very active. This is the most active role. You want to win all of the lanes for your team, but still be a late game active pseudo carry. So you still want to make sure that you're scaling, but scaling off of murdering people instead of scaling off of murdering creeps. And so a great example of a hero that I think does the late game, but also early game activity incredibly well is something like an Ember Spirit, because this hero has tons of disables, split push, you're incredibly hard to kill, you can go in and out of fights, you do a ton of damage, you have damage reductions, so you're tanky, you can kill people, but you can also build a Battle Fury, you can get a Daedalus, you can get Maelstrom. You can go any sort of item build on this hero to make this hero good at doing anything. And also, you could go for like a Deso, Assault Cuirass, that sort of thing is perfectly viable on Ember if you lack tower damage. That, once again, going back to the itemization, make sure that if your hero lacks something, that you are totally comfortable going for some crazy build to make up for what you lack, because this is pubs, you can get away with it. And then in the 1 position, this role likes to get a lot of net worth. You hit creeps, you don't die. You die once or twice, you lose the game. You probably want to hit buildings. That's usually what that role does, so you can actually end the game. And then you want to carry the game with excessive net worth and damage. So this is a weird role because generally this role already scales and controls the game. So what I would say is that the only thing that sometimes you'll lack in the 1 position is early game tower pushing. A lot of the time these heroes will push towers later on into the game. But so if you want to make sure that in your pubs, you're getting that early game tower pressure, because let's say you play 10 pubs in a row, your team is not pressuring towers. Okay, what do? Pick Wraith King. The hero scales because it's a carry. It's good at laning. It does all the stuff you want a carry to do, but you have the skeletons to push towers. So if your team isn't being active enough to make space for you, you can make space for yourself. And so that's the control factor. And that's really what you mostly want to concern yourself with as a carry, because scaling is literally part of the carry's job. So often these heroes will already scale. So that's not something you really have to consider as a carry. One last tip that I do want to give you, actually, there's a couple of tips here at the end that I'd like to give you for drafting in pubs and making sure that your team is well-rounded, even though you can't really communicate that consistently with your team to make sure that they're not picking stupid shit, or maybe it's getting combos. That's a little hard to do with in pure solo queue. But there are still ways to get around that. So to deal with blind picks a lot better, because currently in Dota, and I'm sure for the rest of Dota, this is going to be this way, where there is going to be some position that picks where they're picking blind into another role, or maybe they're picking after the other role. And so sometimes this leads you into a scenario where you are consistently going to be behind and countered in lane or countered in the game, or you're going to consistently not know what you're going to go up against. And so there are ways of abusing this that you should definitely consider. So to deal with these blind picks, which currently exist in Dota, especially on the 2nd phase, is that make sure if one of your teammates is hovering over a hero that is countered by the same hero, by the same type of heroes that counter your hero. So to give you an example, let's say the enemy team, let's say you are hovering over Leshrac. You're an offlaner. You're hovering over Leshrac. Now let's say your mid laner is hovering over Storm Spirit. What do both of these heroes do? They lose all of their mana, they sit at 10% mana in the fight, and they do a crap load of damage. That's all great. Now, what happens if the enemy team picks Anti-Mage? Now, both of you cannot carry the game because you've been hard countered. This guy's going to walk in and press R on either of you, and he's going to win the game. So make sure that it's not an easy task, but it's something that's worth looking at. It's something that's worth definitely thinking about, that if your team is picking a hero of a certain archetype, that you can pick something that is completely different from that archetype if you're blind picking. And the reason for doing that is because it's way less likely that the same hero that is blind picked against you is going to counter both of those heroes. And that's the way that you can consistently make sure that there is some way for you to win in a draft. So for instance, in that example, let's say you're hovering over offlane Leshrac, you have a guy hovering over mid-storm. I will switch that Leshrac pick to an Axe pick because it does all of the things that we previously talked about, but it's a polar opposite archetype of hero. This is a melee, tanky, stunning strength hero versus a damage dealing, carry, mana-based mid hero. Totally different. In that way, no counters. They're gonna have to blind pick 2 counters to both of her heroes, which is significantly less likely than picking the same counter, 1 counter to both of our heroes. So the last thing is that if you are consistently getting countered in games, let's say you're a 5 position and offlane and carry are picking after you, or let's say you're an offlaner and the carry picks after you, which sometimes happens actually in high level pubs. That's kind of the meta right now, is that the carry picks last, which means the offlaner is always countered. That is when Mario heroes are the absolute best. And the reason that I call them Mario heroes is because I'm thinking about Mario in Super Smash Bros. And Mario just in the whole Nintendo world in general. What do you think when you hear the name Mario? He's just the generic guy. Nobody's that excited to play Mario in Super Smash Brothers or something like that, but nobody's like, oh, that character sucks. He's just the guy. He's the normal guy. And so in Dota, the heroes that I consider Mario heroes are the ones that they aren't really that exciting, but no matter how the game goes, they'll be fine. And in Dota, generally stunners are very good Mario heroes. So in the offlane, something like a Tiny is always going to be fine, because no matter how hard countered he is, he's always going to be able to stun. And that's just always good. So make sure that if you are in a meta, if you are in a position that is consistently getting countered, that you are picking heroes that do not give a shit about being countered. Make sure that you are picking Mario heroes in Dota 2. That's it for this video. Make sure that if you are picking in your pubs, do not pick like it's competitive. Make sure to abuse the crazy, uncoordinated chaos that is the Dota 2 pubs that we know and love and also kind of hate. But with that being said, thank you so much for watching this video, guys, and I hope to see you in another video.